Locked in but locked out. My sisters and I were sure our mother hated us, and if there was ever any doubt, Saturday mornings always erased that feeling. Before I get into it, I should probably explain who my sisters are. Well, my family is huge. Believe it or not, I have 8 siblings. Same mum, same dad. So altogether there were 9 of us. 9 personalities, 9 different experiences, and, I guess, 9 traumatized children. Now, the sisters I speak of were the 2 I shared a room with. We were fairly close growing up, close in age too, no more than 3 years apart. Out of the 3 of us, I was in the middle, the eldest, let's call her Sarah, and the youngest, Emma. I was a quiet child for the most part. I hated attention, was very observant and introverted by nature, but always felt an urge to speak up for what I felt was right despite the consequences, and to be honest, I hated this about myself. I'd often find myself in trouble for defending those who never cared, let alone dared to defend me, and despite knowing that, it never stopped me. I never stopped trying to fix what was broken, even though it meant I'd be doing it alone. I guess that was the empathy in me. Yearning for justice under an unjust ruling and wanting fairness in an unfair world was used against me, used to demonize me as the confrontational, mannerless, mental and aggressive child who always spoke back, the one who supposedly had zero respect for her parents and time again. I was beaten down for it, physically, mentally, and emotionally. As a child, I was aware of too much. I forgave too often and bore more than my fair share. Sarah, on the other hand, was nothing like me. She lived for attention, loved being seen, heard, and admired, even if it meant stirring the pot just to watch it boil over. She was sly with it too, always knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. Drama followed her like a shadow, and she loved it as long as she wasn't on the receiving end. She told more lies than she did the truth, exaggerated a lot, twisted the littlest things until they turned into chaos, and had a habit of nudging the rest of us into trouble while she watched from the sidelines, never without a smirk on her face, which would frequently turn into a burst of laughter when she couldn't hold it in anymore. She was the type to throw stones and not only hide her hand, but hide behind someone else, and it was usually me. Emma and I were a lot closer, and Sarah hated that. She'd often try to wedge herself between us. If Emma and I were to fall out on our own accord, Sarah would go around to each of us playing Chinese whispers, provoking and doing what she did best, lying and scheming, and even though we both knew better, sometimes, it worked. We all knew what Sarah was like, we all knew her bad habits, and yet I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She pretended to be strong when I knew she was broken. She pretended not to care about things when I knew it was all she cared about. She wasn't as tough as she made out, and I saw through her act. I knew it was just that, an act. So even when I knew better, I allowed her to stay close. Emma, however, was quite different. Although she came across shy and timid, she was far from it. In spaces she felt safe, and around people she felt comfortable. She was her real self. She was loud, loved to laugh, and silly in the best way. For her age, she was quite clued up. But I guess that's how it goes when you've grown up in a household like ours. Emma was the type that could hardly be swayed or manipulated. She was small in frame but carried a fire inside her that you didn't want to unleash. She was smart and had a lot more control over her temper than I did. She chose her battles, knowing when to stay and fight and when to walk away, and somehow that made her even more powerful in my eyes. Sarah would try to pick on her, but it would always backfire. It was near enough impossible to win an argument with Emma, as she was quick-witted, responded with intention, was sharp and controlled. One of the things I admired the most about Emma was that she wasn't a people-pleaser. If she was happy, that was enough. She didn't care much about how you twisted her words or what you wanted her to feel. She knew who she was. And maybe that's what made Sarah so jealous. Emma's peace with herself, her ability to be as real as she could to herself without apology. Now we've got that out the way, let's get back into the story. Saturdays meant shopping day for our mother. It's strange it's been years since I've referred to her as that. Ever since I had left what was disguised as a home to any outsider looking in, whenever she was mentioned, it was always on a first-name basis, so, going forward, we'll call her Eve. Eve would wake up early around 7 o'clock and start her morning moaning segment. This could have been about anything. When I say anything, I really do mean anything. From how much she hated our neighbour who she was adamant was a witch, to how good-for-nothing and worthless she thought her girl children were. We lived in a 3-story house with high ceilings in the corridors, so her voice echoed throughout the house. She would walk up and down the corridor of the second floor, back and forth to the bathroom and her bedroom, shouting to herself about her children. She had no reason to be in the bathroom as she'd finished showering. She just needed to make sure we all knew she was in a foul mood, and what better way to do this than be in a space that echoed, her voice ringing through every inch of a quiet house. She was an intentional woman, and this was how the run-up to her rampage usually started. Unfortunately for Emma, Sarah and I, our bedroom was the only one located on that same floor, right next door to hers, so we could hear and feel every word she said, and they were truly heartfelt. She really meant them. Some Saturdays, me and my sisters would sit on our beds and whisper jokes to each other in response to her, like, can she shut up with her big fat self? Can she see herself? Can she hurry up and go out and shut up? Hilarious, right? Not really. Looking back at it now, I guess the giggles were brought on by the adrenaline of saying things we knew we shouldn't have, completely disregarding what would have happened if we were ever caught saying them. Most of the time it was to lighten the mood, as either Sarah and I would be viciously targeted. Out of nowhere, she'd make digs about the way either of us looked and how much she despised us for that reason alone. We were the youngest and the most dependent, so to her, we were easy pickings. It probably sounds like we were a bunch of nasty children who didn't understand the struggle of a mother. But no, this was a mother who would quite literally sneak in our bedroom in the middle of the night to check whether Sarah and I wet the bed, and if we had, would beat us awake, take us to the bathroom and shower us in freezing cold water. This was a mother whose heavy hand I watched chase and beat my sister with a rolling pin just because the kitchen tables hadn't been properly cleaned. Sarah, who I barely saw cry, but witnessed wailing that day, with each hit getting harder the more she argued back as she cried. This was a mother who believed a lie my aunt told her and slapped me so hard in my face, I saw lights as my aunt stood by and sniggered. This was a mother who I watched sit on my sister's chest while she punched her face and pulled her hair because her side of the room was messy. This was a mother that at 6 years old I watched take a blender to my brother's head. An image so traumatizing I can still visualize to this day. This was a mother I watched hit my sister in her nose until it bled. This was a mother who I watched laugh at my sister Emma, who wet herself while she was being beaten by our father. This was a mother who pitted her children against each other. This mother was our mother, a violent narcissist, a woman who despised her daughters and merely disliked the actions of her sons. The truth is, I hated Eve. I hated her for who she was. I don't think any of my siblings hated her as much as I did. Despite it all, they still had this attachment to her. There would be times I'd say, I wish she'd just die, or I wish the devil would come and take her away, and that was always met with, no, Meddy, you're taking it too far. But I never felt bad for having this feeling. I hated how she treated me, and I hated her even more for how she treated my siblings. I guess for me, witnessing the abuse felt more like torture than actually being the one going through it. We didn't know it was abuse back then, because everybody got beats, right? I remember a time being at school with my friends laughing about getting beats. We'd ask questions like, have you ever got beats with the belt, the slipper? Oh my gosh, what about the curtain wire? Of course I was able to say yes to all of them. Then it was my turn to ask, what about the Hoover pipe? And in that short moment I knew, even though we were similar, we were still so different. They all stopped laughing, looked at me confused and said, wait, what? Hoover pipe? I wasn't someone who lied, so in that moment, even though I felt uncomfortable and somewhat embarrassed, I couldn't help but say yes. And there it was. 12 and 13-year-olds telling me my mother had gone too far and could have killed me. Most Saturdays our room would be quiet, with a heavy feeling of sadness, while we laid on our beds, waiting for the moment she'd head out, knowing some of that misery would leave out with her. We were tired of hearing that we were nobodies. We'd try to silence her noise by turning on the TV, but she'd barge in and scream at us to turn it off if she hadn't already marched over to it and aggressively shut it off herself, making sure to hit at least one of us on her way back out, and unfortunately for me, I was usually the easiest target as my bed was closest to the door. Like I said, Eve was an intentional woman. She knew the TV would drown out her noise. Even if we could hear the sound of her kicking off, just not being able to hear her exact words took a little bit of that darkness away. After she had gotten herself dressed, she'd lock her bedroom door, and all you could hear were her large set of keys jingling. On this bunch were the keys to the ground floor bathroom, the living room, storage cupboard where the extra bedding was kept, the kitchen and the pantry cupboard where all the treats were stocked and stacked. These were the forbidden goodies. These were strictly for guests, herself, and her cowardly complicit husband, our father. Once she'd locked up, she'd walk down the 2 flights of stairs and our bedroom and bodies felt this instant sense of relief. The moment Eve got to the ground floor, lockdown began. She would first stop off at the living room, check the garden door was locked, and return back to the living room door, slam it shut, and lock it. Next was the pantry cupboard, which was more of a check as this was never left open along with the ground floor toilet. She finally got to the kitchen, took her shopping trolley and locked the door. You could tell how much pleasure she took in doing this. She'd sing a hymn wildly out of key while she slammed each door shut, shamelessly, jingling her keys, pretending to figure out which key was for what door, even though she knew. It was obvious she did it to remind us how much power she had over us. And that was that. We'd hear the front door shut, then the gates close behind her. We were finally free, but we were hungry. By this time, my sisters and I were familiar with her lockdown routine. This wasn't just a Saturday occurrence. The only difference was, we knew her Saturday schedule, so we came up with a plan. We were going to break into the kitchen. Operation: feed ourselves. Now you're probably wondering, how on earth could we break into a locked kitchen? Did we have a spare key? Did we steal Eve's key? No. As much as we hated life, not all of us were ready for it to end. We were thinking big, smart. We had to. There was no way we could get away with pinching her keys without her noticing and facing repercussions. She was a ruthless woman, and back then, we tried everything we could to avoid her wrath. The plan. All 3 of us had a role, and just like a normal robbery, you need the planner. That was me, the lookout, Sarah, and the thief, Emma. We needed to make sure we all knew the plan right down to a T, as it had to be executed with precision. If it went wrong, not only were we in for it, it also meant that we'd never be able to do it again. My role as the planner was pivotal. Not only did I have to plan this mission, I had to do the one job that made sure everyone else could do theirs, and timing was very important. Let's take this story back a bit. Whilst Eve was doing one of the things she did best, cussing, even though I couldn't stand it, or her, I had to put myself in the firing line so we could eat. When she had gone back to her room, I got out of bed and went to the bathroom. I knew she'd scream at me to get out as she'd say she wasn't finished, but that was all part of the plan. I needed her to notice me. I was what people would now call an overthinker, but back then, I was known as a forward thinker. I knew if she had seen me, she'd have to wait in her room for me to finish using the toilet. Given the stairs would creak like a door out of a horror film, it was damn near impossible to sneak downstairs, so I needed a cover. It's not making much sense, is it? What does going to the toilet have to do with our creaky stairs? Let me guide you through what I had planned. Phase 1. So, here's how I did it. I'd position myself as close to the bathroom door as possible while reaching over to the toilet handle so I could flush it. The sound of the flushing toilet was going to cover up the noise of the first few creaky steps, which were the noisiest as I went down them. Like I said, timing was important and I had to move quickly, and so did my sisters. They needed to be on high alert. The moment that toilet flushed, Sarah was responsible for opening our bedroom door, and Emma's job was to make the sounds of footsteps so it sounded like I went back in. Once the sound effects kicked in, I'd quickly run down those stairs, not one, but 2 flights of them. The faster I went down them, the lighter my feet were, so the less the stairs would creak. I made it. There I was, standing in her precious kitchen. Step 1. The hardest part of the plan was over. Now it was time for step 2, the easiest step, but the part of the plan where we probably needed the most luck. All I had left to do was roll up the blinds, lift the handle to unlock the kitchen window, and roll the blinds back down again. The rest was luck, hoping she wouldn't notice the kitchen window hadn't been locked the night before, and that day, it sounded like she hadn't. Her and her shopping trolley were on their way up the street to the market and shopping centre where she'd spend most of the day. Yay, now we can all relax, right? Wrong. This is where Sarah comes in, our lookout. If you're wondering if I made it back to my bedroom, I did. But unfortunately, there wasn't a way to do this without getting caught, so I caught a few slaps hoping they'd be worth it. Phase 2. See, Eve was a scatty woman, so it was normal for her to do a U-turn back to the house. Here she'd come on her way back, feeling guilty for forgetting to feed her children. Just kidding. Who knows what it was she'd forgotten that day, but we definitely weren't on that list. Our eyes and ears would get into place. She had 2 options. Our bedroom window, where we had full vision of the square, or outside, leant over the gate looking down our street. That day, she chose the gate. Now it was time for me and our thief to get down to business. Phase 3. Emma was tiny, so she was perfect for her role. And me? Well, I was what Eve would call fat. A big fat pig, to be precise. Sometimes she'd switch it up and call me a hog, but I guess given what needed to be done, being on the chubbier side worked in our favour. I edged open the kitchen window, reached in and clicked the safety lock so I could pull the window open as wide as possible and gave Emma a boost in, on my fat back. The kitchen restaurant was now open, but she was on a strict timer. We needed her in fast and out even faster. Orders were coming in left, right and centre as by this time, our 4 other siblings had come out of their rooms and began shouting their orders from the first floor to the front door. "Bread and jam, please. Let me get bread and butter, and I beg you put some turkey ham in it. Have you ever played Diner Dash or any kitchen frenzy games?" That's exactly what the atmosphere in the kitchen was like. Once all the sandwiches were made with any extras wrapped up in foil, I'd help Emma climb back out of the kitchen. She always ended up with a few scrapes on her legs as for some reason it was easier getting her in than it was getting her out. Nevertheless, mission completed. The sandwich shop was closed for business, the blinds were rolled down, the window pushed back in, and we were all back in our rooms eating our sandwiches, laughing about how badly the bread had been buttered and why the jam was only spread in the middle. But we were grateful, as we weren't always this lucky. But this was one of the Saturdays where luck was on our side. I remember feeling proud of what we accomplished, but I will never forget thinking, how on earth no one in the neighbourhood noticed us? A bunch of children coming out their house and passing food through the window of that very same house. We lived on a square, number 85 to be exact. The houses and flats all faced each other, and there wasn't a property that didn't have a view of ours. So we weren't hard to miss, especially being the only house in the area with nearly 9 children. I say nearly because by this time 2 had already left, but that's another story for another day. Written by Meddy.